All right, let's get into it. Today, we're tackling the one skill that pretty much unlocks every other skill: learning how to learn. We're going to break down a system for picking up new skills way faster than you probably ever thought was possible. I mean, come on, who hasn't dreamed of this? Maybe you wanted to learn a backflip to impress your crush back in 6th grade. Or maybe now you want to learn a whole new language or how to code. We all have something we wish we could just master. But a lot of the time, the process itself just feels like this giant, impossible wall. And you know what? It's not really our fault. The way most of us went through school, it really just conditioned us to cram information for a test, and then, poof, it's gone the second we walk out of the exam. But that's just memorizing. Real learning, true learning, is about understanding something so deeply that you can apply it, you can retain it, and it just becomes a part of. So where do most of us go wrong? Well, it usually comes down to this really fundamental misunderstanding of how our brains actually build skills. We fall into this trap of just passively consuming stuff. Think about it for a second. When you decide you want to learn something new, what's the first thing you do? You probably go grab a book or you watch a ton of YouTube tutorials, right? That's all input. But learning is a contact sport. The real results, the stuff that actually sticks, comes from output, from actually doing the thing, from practicing the skill, and yeah, even from trying to teach it to someone else. Okay, so if we're going to be active, we have to be strategic about it. The key isn't to learn everything, it's about learning the right things. And this right here is the first major pillar of our learning system. This brings us to something called the Pareto principle. You've probably heard of it as the 80-20 rule, and it is such a powerful idea that applies to, well, almost everything, but especially learning. The core idea is that a tiny fraction of your effort, just 20%, can get you the vast majority of your results. Just think about what that really means for a minute. You don't need to put in 100% of the effort to learn 100% of a topic, especially not at the beginning. You can get 80% of the way there by focusing on just the most critical 20% of the material. Your job then is to figure out what is that critical 20%. So, what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, if you're learning Spanish, you don't need to know every single word. You focus on the 1,000 most common ones, because they make up about 80% of daily conversation. Learning guitar? Just master the basic chords that show up in thousands and thousands of songs. By finding and really nailing that core 20%, everything else becomes so much easier. Okay, so once we've figured out what to learn using that 80-20 rule, we need the right techniques to actually get it to stick in our brains. And yeah, you really can think of this like a workout for your mind. This slide just nails one of the most powerful methods out there: active recall. You see, passively rereading a chapter is like going to the gym and just staring at the dumbbells. It does absolutely nothing. Active recall is the mental equivalent of actually picking up those weights and lifting them. It's when you close the book and force your brain to pull that information out of thin air. And it's so simple to do. First, you study something. Then, you step away from it. Put your notes away, close the laptop. And finally, you try to explain it out loud or write it down completely from memory. It's that effort, that struggle to retrieve the information that builds and strengthens the connections in your brain, making the memory way stronger. So, when should you actually do this active recall? Well, that's where spaced repetition comes in. Instead of cramming for 6 hours straight the night before a test, which we all know is just a short-term fix, you space out your learning. You do smaller chunks over several days. This is so much more effective, because every time you come back to the topic, it's like you're carving that mental path a little deeper, making it a clear, well-trodden road that's easy to access later on. Now look, all these brain hacks are fantastic, but they don't mean a thing without application. Active recall and spaced repetition, they build the foundation, but it's practice that builds the skyscraper. You have to move from just knowing to actually doing. And I'm not talking about just any old practice. I'm talking about deliberate practice. This means you have to intentionally focus on the parts you find the most difficult, your personal weaknesses inside that critical 20%. So if you're learning to draw, don't just sketch the same easy thing over and over. You gotta challenge yourself with the hard stuff, like drawing hands or getting perspective right. It's uncomfortable for sure, but that discomfort, that's where all the growth happens. And here's a cool thing, practice doesn't always mean doing. One of the most powerful forms of practice is actually teaching. And this quote just sums it up perfectly. The act of trying to teach something forces you to simplify, to organize your thoughts, and it immediately shines a huge spotlight on any gaps in your own understanding. And you don't even need a real student. Just grab a friend and try to explain the concept. Or you can record yourself on your phone as if you're making a quick video about it. The pressure of having to make it clear for someone else, even a pretend someone else, deepens your own mastery like nothing else. So we have the techniques, we have the practice methods, but we also need to build a supportive environment for all of this to actually work. Your habits and your surroundings matter just as much as your study methods. Here are a few key things to build a really strong learning system. First, use more of your senses. If you're learning that language, don't just read it. Listen to it, watch it, write it, and speak it. Then you gotta make it fun. Turn it into a game, give yourself rewards, keep your brain motivated. And of course, get rid of distractions. Multitasking is a total myth, but maybe most importantly, get enough sleep. Seriously, pulling an all-nighter is just sabotaging yourself because your brain needs that sleep time to process and store all the new information. But underneath all of this, the techniques, the practice, the environment, there is one final, absolutely critical component. It is the foundation that everything else is built on. And this slide just captures it perfectly. It's the huge shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. If you truly believe you're just bad at learning, well, you will be. But if you believe you can get better with effort, you open up a whole world of possibility. Adding that one tiny word, yet, changes everything. It reframes failure not as a dead end, but just as a temporary stop on the path to getting better. Look, learning isn't some magical talent you're born with. It's a process. It's a skill that you can develop and get better at. With the right strategies, focusing on output, using the 80-20 rule, practicing active recall, and building a growth mindset, you can truly learn anything faster. So the only question left is, what are you going to choose?